from 6 o'clock in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. That was a lot of hours of praying that God would spare your very life and you would be able to get to safety. At that point in time, I think that was the most important thing on your mind. I don't think you were thinking about future, you know, will we have a home, will Daddy have a job, or, you know, you weren't thinking those thoughts. You were just thinking, are we going to be able to get out of here?
But it was colder than hell that day. It rained, it snowed,
it was,
sleeted,
I mean, yes,
it blew, it did everything.
Well, I was stationed with the Coast Guard at Oregon Inlet, and we got no warning it was coming. We had no idea.
Ocean sounded like a freight train. You never heard anything like it, just a roar.
You don't really leave for northeasters, not ordinarily. This was a storm from hell. 1962 was just not your normal northeaster.
That getting caught in a storm like that in your house is a bad feeling because you don't know what's going to happen.
My dad used to say, Mother Nature will take care of the weak. And Mother Nature did take care of the weak during the Ash Wednesday storm.
Incorporated in 1961, the town of Nags Head has long been known for its idyllic ocean views, hospitality, and is a place of joy for so many. Surrounded by such natural and seemingly steadfast beauty, it's often easy to take for granted the area's fragility and the events and experiences of those who helped to forge the town into the community it is today. For the town of Nags Head, what is locally referred to as the Ash Wednesday Storm of 1962 is one of those events that not only connected and shaped the community, but helped to build the resilient town that we know today.
I always like to say the Outer Banks at that time was a community that you didn't lock your doors when you left your house. It was like everybody was family.
I grew up at South Nags Head, literally grew up fishing and playing and no houses anywhere near us. So the beach was our playground and the sand hills were our sand hills.
Back then you didn't have streets like we have today. We had the bypass, we had NC-12, the beach road, but we didn't have those connecting streets from the beach road to there. I used to come home from school and I had an English racer bicycle, and I could get on that bicycle and get on the beach road and ride as far as I wanted to ride and never see a car. And you got to also remember that we had one television station at that time and no local radio. All the radio stations were from, Norfolk or Raleigh or somewhere like that. You just didn't have the communications that we have today.
We were connected at the station to a teletype circuit, and every day, every morning at 8 o'clock we get a weather message, at 12 o'clock we get a weather message, 6 in the evening and midnight, every 4 hours we get a weather message, and they tell us if something's coming. But on the March storm, we got nothing except the regular weather forecast. The weather was not bad, it was not cold, real cold. It was probably chilly with wind, but the weather was not real bad. The day before it was not bad. But that night we got the wind and rain.
I looked out the big picture windows at the ocean and I said, I'm like 12 years old. And I said, Daddy, it's really rough out there tonight. This is a big ocean. And he said, it's not to worry. He said, I called the Elizabeth City weather station, and they said there's nothing out there, not to worry.
It's really such a unique storm, huge impact in our area. It was a storm that started off as not a lot. We had a weak area of low pressure moving up the coast, another disturbance across the Ohio Valley, and as they combined off the coast, that's where it really turned to an intense storm on March 7th. In fact, it intensified to 979 millibars. That's the borderline roughly between a Category 1 and 2 hurricane. So it was a very strong storm, really quickly developed kind of overnight.
My sister and I slept on the ocean side, and we could hear the ocean hitting the side of the house and flapping up underneath. You could hear the waves come up and splash underneath. But with Daddy, if he said it's okay, go to bed, you didn't wake him up. About 5:30 in the morning, Daddy came in and he said, "Get up, get out, don't stop for anything." So I slid my shoes on, I threw my winter coat on, it was freezing out, and I grabbed my school books. We began to walk down the driveway, going down. I had a sister and they had a house at the lower end towards the highway. The wind was so strong that it blew Mama over, and she fell down on the cement, and we finally got her back up. It was really hurricane force wind. It was really bad. Scary because the water was coming over at that time, 5:30 in the morning. The water was coming over through the sand dunes and washing down into the highway. I looked up at Daddy and I said, I've got my school books now. And I said, "Daddy, what about school today?" And he said, "Oh, kid, there ain't gonna be no school today."
I was actually 12 years old when the storm hit. So I would go around the house and out to the beach road to catch the school bus. And as I went around the north end of our house, the water was already about knee deep from the storm, unbeknownst to us. And so I immediately went back in the house and I told my mom and dad, I said, we probably won't be going to school today because the ocean's coming across and it's already filled the road up with water. And my dad said, "What?" And as he went out, he realized exactly what I had seen was the ocean coming across.
We went into my sister's house, and I can remember my dad looking out the window and watching up towards the pier house. And by then, now it's 30 minutes later, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, and the pilings eroded out from under that pier house, and it fell to the ground or to the lower level on the beach. And when it did, it exploded like a bomb had hit it. It just went to pieces. And my dad looked out and he said, "There goes $75,000. Just like that, was gone.
I didn't know about it until about 6:30 that morning. I had a fish truck that was supposed to be going out to Norfolk, and he stopped and come back and woke me up. And I got up and we went and looked, and I had about 2 or 3 inches of water on the concrete in front of my place, and every now and then one of them big waves would wash on over. Well, we'd seen that before. That didn't worry me. But in about an hour, that water started really rising. By 10 o'clock, I had 22 inches in my store, and we knew something was bad wrong then.
So as that water was moving in at that time, and we knew we had to get out of there because we didn't know if it was just going to keep coming and coming, if it was going to stop.
The storm was more than 200 miles from our coastline when it really intensified and produced a lot of our damage across the Outer Banks. So it really reiterates the storm doesn't have to necessarily cross right across our area to cause impacts. And what made it really so bad is there's a very strong area of high pressure to the north, and that blocked the storm from moving.
The water rose that first day, I want to say it was in some places 4 to 6 feet deep, but it also brought the sand with it from the ocean. Every wave would bring another bucket or two of sand down through the cottages and down to the beach road.
And as we started a kind of a caravan coming from South Nags Head going north to try to get to Manteo to get to safety, there were breaches in the sand hills that looked like small inlets coming over where the water, it just didn't stop. It just kept pouring over and over into the highway, which meant as you're driving, the next big wave was going to whoosh in front of you. And you were just hoping that your engine wouldn't stop and that you could continue to ford it. And then a little bit further north, as you get to what is still there, the Dolphin Motel, that road was not there. We found that the road had washed out and there was no road, and one of our cars dropped down into a hole, and they had little children with them, probably 4 or 5 years old, and they had to swim out of the car and get into somebody else's car.
I don't ever remember getting wet because the first place they put me was standing me on the toilet in the bathroom, and I watched the water come in and flood the tub. Took me, shoved me through the bathroom window at my dad's house into a wooden skiff. I can remember the winds howling and blowing and the water still coming up, and us moving back to my grandmother's house, which we thought was a safe place that was about 5 foot off of the ground. And from my grandmother's house, I watched Bowen's store burn to the water line. And for a 12-year-old boy myself, watching this was out of the norm. I can only say that a lot of feelings go through you even today from that time when things were happening almost instantaneously.
So we went a little further up the beach, another 1.5 miles maybe, to a little cottage court type thing, or a little motel, I suppose, called the Viviana. And the lady in there said, y'all just come on in. Now, she's got water all around her too, but she said, come on in and stay in one of the rooms for a while and rest. So we did that, and later in the day, one of the professors that had been working on the pier, he came by and he had what my dad called a carry-all. To me, it was just a big SUV that was raised up, and he was able to attach a chain to our car and pull us from the old beach road over to the bypass. And then we were able to go from there to Manteo. Of course, we came to the elementary school in Manteo because that was the safe place to go.
And we stayed at my grandmother's house until, I want to say it was sometime around 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it really started to get a little worse. I can remember when we came out of the house, it started to sleet, it started to snow. So it was thundering and lightning, sleeting, snowing, wind was howling. My dad was over the side of the boat. My uncle was trying to keep the outboard motor running as we went back to the bypass at that time. We got picked up and we were all taken to Collington, where my Uncle Charles and Aunt Joanne had a house.
When you got to Manteo, other than a little bit of wind, you didn't know there was a storm. They didn't realize there was a bad storm.
Later on, I heard that the vendors from Elizabeth City, the Coca-Cola, the Jeanette's Fruit and Produce, and a number of them had come down and come across the bridge, and until they got to that big high hill there, they didn't know anything was happening over on the beach. But when they saw the sand and water all over the road and they couldn't come, some of them turned around and went back, and then some people decided to alert somebody that something was happening down there, in which they did.
With the Ash Wednesday storm, it was here for 3 days through 5 high tide cycles. So it was that impact over and over again through each high tide cycle that caused so many issues. As if that wasn't enough, it was the spring tide, so it was one of our higher tides of the year. And with the proximity off the coast, our fetch of water was over 600 miles long. When you have a long fetch of water, that water has a chance to pile up. So those northeast winds with this Ash Wednesday storm had a long time to pile up that water. It's very similar to a hurricane that's approaching. As you pile up that water, potential for higher water levels, and also when you have beach erosion, dune issues, it'll continue through multiple tide cycles when you have that long fetch just piling it up.
For 3 days, the people of Nags Head were battered by freezing winds, rain, and storm surge that rolled over the town from the sea to the sound.
All the electricity was gone, and put on the transistor. The Coast Guard was saying, God bless them, the Coast Guard was saying, all those trapped down there, put sheets in your west window so we'll know where to tell people to come. Which we did. And so about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Charles Nunemaker, God bless him, at the fish place, Carl Nunnemaker's brother, came in the living room and his motor and his fan broke. And he carried us out on his shoulder.
I had a airboat over in Collins, and fortunately I brought it over, and we run up and down Highway 12 out there taking people out that were still stranded, and also one thing, the Carolina Hotel had a bunch of frozen food in their place. We knew it was going to spoil because there's no electricity. So we took it out, and they just give it to anybody that would take it that could cook. And that's one way we had food.
But the pressure from the water that got trapped from the beach road to the bypass ultimately had to go somewhere. Well, it chose Jigsaw Road.
Once that road broke through at that point, we could see that the water level was beginning to drop because it simply poured then into the sound.
It washed houses off their foundations into the sound. It took that road completely out.
Now the water stayed knee-deep about it for several days before we could finally get around.
I want to say 3 to 5 days after that, it was like any other Outer Banks day. Sunshiny, but it was, you know, it just didn't feel normal.
Then we were making preparations. We knew the road was flooded. A lot of the highway was washed out, gone, and a lot of sand on the road. So we knew we were there for a while. Well, we had what they call an amphibious duck, which was a truck with a propeller that could go on the land or in the water. So the day after the storm, the chief sent the duck from Oregon Inlet to Nags Head and went up there and looked around and come back. So they wanted it up there again, so the next time I drove it up there. Well, we come up to what is now the beach road, and there was a lot of sand, a lot of water, no houses. It was a matter of just trying to stay on the road for water and sand. And it seemed to me like there was about 6 feet of sand on the beach road. And then the water was still running over, and this was 3 days after. Some areas the houses were demolished, and some areas they were just washed away, washed off the foundation, but a lot of them were demolished.
The first thing that the town council and the higher-ups did was call in the National Guard.
They were down in 3 days, in 3 days' time.
The Coast Guard did have their helicopter come down, and they picked up a lot of people and took them out. Then they closed off on the north side of the Currituck Bridge, and I think on the west side of this bridge over here at Manteo.
That's right.
And they wouldn't let anybody go over unless you could prove you owned property. And the only way you could do that, you either had a deed or something that you paid taxes on that property.
Now, something that maybe a lot of people don't think about is when you have a storm like that, you have a lot of septic pollution.
But they brought in water tanks because, again, everybody's water was from pump water. You had salt saturation, you had septic, all kinds of stuff that people couldn't drink. They had a checkpoint at Danube Street, just north of there, that had a big, huge truck with a tank on the back of it that was filled with potable water, and you would fill up your water there.
One thing, the water had to be tested. It was a long time. I mean, I had the little restaurant that I had there. It was a long time before the state would clear me that I could use water in order to make coffee and sell.
We had to have typhoid shots. We had to have all kinds of shots before we were even allowed to go back over to the beach, even to survey what was left and what wasn't.
A big problem for a long time was sand on the highway, on the road. 5 feet of sand's a lot of sand. Like today, when we have a problem with sand on the road, state will have the equipment in the night before to move it. And the next morning they're moving sand. So, and back then they didn't have the equipment that they have today, but they were moving the equipment in on the ferry right away.
I want to say it was probably May before the people were able to come back in here. I mean, it was a massive amount of sand, and to push all that sand back to the beach and not do any more damage to, people's property than what it had done, it was pretty. It took a long time.
The ocean silt was the great amazing thing to me. You would have thought only sand came from the ocean, but the rooms had silt as deep as 6 and 8 inches. The unbelievable, remarkable part of this is that the beacon was cleaned and recarpeted and refurnished, and the motel, Cabana East, was carried up to its roof and opened June 1st. Both motels opened June 1st.
Somehow my dad, my brother, and my brother-in-law were able to get back over and begin cleaning up. This is March 7th. He's open for business by the 1st of June. So you have a little bit of March, April, and May, 3 months, and we have a home to live in and a pier put back out there. That's amazing. You just don't do that. Now our house was 2 bedrooms, living room, dining, kitchen, it was just a little box house is what it was. But I'm telling you, when you have nothing, it's a mansion. It's a mansion. And that is the pier house and the pier that is there today.
I watched them tear the floors out. My mom walked in the back door and she stopped at the door and she said, and I was standing right next to her, she said, if that ever happens again, I will never come back. But we lived there for another, let's see, that was 62, another 22 years.
Well, the town was pretty young when Ash Wednesday came about because the town was incorporated in 1961. Ash Wednesday was 1962. But I think the people that were on the board then, they actually had lived here, so they knew what to do. At the time we didn't have city water, so your infrastructure was 158 and Highway 12. Ash Wednesday storm probably taught people that we have to do planning, better planning and zoning. The town actually was instrumental in getting the water system that we have now. And then the town developed throughout the years, as the years went by, good zoning regulations, and it was a learning process. As you know, we probably have a lot more rules now than we ever had then.
But they saw during that storm that they needed drainage, and they went after it. By the time I got to the board, they done a good job.
A lot of the ditches over that way were created after Ash Wednesday to drain the water off of everywhere. There's a lot of different ditches around Nags Head that DOT came in and cut. And so they cut stuff out and made ditches and drainage areas. in order to drain all the land to keep it off, because once it went from the ocean to the sound, it just stayed in between the highways, and you wanted the water gone. But needless to say, there were a whole lot less houses out here then than there are now.
And you got to be prepared for it. That's where I think Nags Head has prepared for it to a point in moving the houses back from the ocean farther. Nags Head's been pretty proactive. I think it changed development to a point. I think Nags Head was more cautious with development on the beach.
Things have changed so much, but technology has changed too. I mean, I can look at my phone and I can tell you what the weather's going to be. I can turn around and I can say, Alexa, what's the weather for tomorrow?
So much has changed. That was in 1962. Satellites were just coming around. We did not have the observations that we do now. So we have Doppler radar now. We have satellites. They show us where there's clouds and storms or clear skies. This is how we can track storms coming off the coast of Africa as a disturbance. So nowadays we can see storms well out into the ocean and we can see how they form. In addition, our satellites were upgraded a couple years ago. They actually measure every 5 minutes. So nowadays, every 5 minutes, we're getting a picture of the clouds above us, whereas in the 60s, satellites were just coming around and we didn't have access to that data. So the other aspect, not only are we monitoring things like clouds with satellites, we have gauges, water level gauges across Dare County and the state, so we can monitor the water levels so we know where they are now, and then we can make projections based on those. Another thing that has changed is before we would issue storm warnings and gale warnings and small craft advisory. Those are marine headlines. That's what we did in the 60s. Now we do coastal flood. So if there's, we're expecting more than 3 feet above ground level of coastal flooding, we'll issue warnings on those. So we do more warnings and we can see more than we could back in the 60s. I think our biggest issue in 2023 is underestimating what could actually happen. Oh, it could never happen to me. It's never happened here before. New folks to the area, not anticipating it. So it's letting our guard down even though we're provided with the knowledge that it could happen. So when local officials are telling you, this is what we expect, this is what we really should be prepared for. So it's happened before, it can happen again. Our biggest issue is not really thinking it could actually happen to us.
In the long run, it's the citizens with all the damage that have the impacts, and there's no way to make anybody truly whole. And not everybody can afford to fix up their place again or deal with the damage if it's lost. You can have just as much damage in a nor'easter as you can a hurricane. I think we're as resilient as we can be. Is there always something we need to do better? Yes. We find that out after every storm. Okay, here's what we need to do better in the next storm. I hope we all learn lessons from every single storm that we've dealt with.
I used to tell people on the Board of Commissioners, if we ever get a storm like that again, it's going to cripple us. With all the development today on the beach, it's really going to hurt us. It's going to hurt tourism.
We haven't had any kind of storms since 1962 that were that horrendous, and you know that there's always the possibility.
No other storm in at least the last 50 years has taken away more buildings or land than the Ash Wednesday storm, and that's according to the USGS. So tremendous impact in our area, and as we continue to say, it could happen again, so it's something we need to be cognizant of.
Remember that Mother Nature has no boundaries. Mother Nature's going to do what Mother Nature's going to do. She's going to snow when she wants to. She's going to rain when she wants to. She's going to make the ocean so mean and so volatile that no man-made object is going to stop the fury or the veracity of Mother Nature.